Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This is going to be the fourth fic in the Breaking Point series. This will be entitled Breaking Ground. He stared up at the ceiling, taking in the cracks and creases and little speckled bumps as best as he could in the dark. He was supposed to be asleep, but his mind was running 1,000,000 miles an hour, especially after Kirishima had left him with their classmates. I have no right to ask this of you, Midoriya, but we can save him. We can go and save him with our own hands. The redhead had held his hands out toward the bedridden student, a hopeful smile on his face, even as his eyes burned with determination. What if I don't want to save him? He questioned back with a frown on his face. What if I don't want to put my future, my chances of being a hero, at risk to save Bakugo? Why should I put my neck on the line when he's done nothing but show hatred for me? Because, despite everything he's done to you, you still want to be a hero. Kirishima gulped as he took in the hardened emerald eyes, wondering if he could say anything to convince his classmate, though he dared not push it if he got to a point where he could very well make the small boy his enemy. You want to be better than what he did to you. You want to help people, save them no matter who they are. He frowned as he thought about something that had happened at the camp. That's why you tried to save him during the camp, even as injured as you already were. Izuku glared at the other before turning his head away. I'll think about it. Kirishima sighed as his shoulders had slumped. Yeah, okay. We can't do anything until tomorrow at the earliest anyways. Just let me know if you decide to help. Then he turned with the rest of their classmates and left. They wanted him to help save Bakugo, to save the childhood tormentor and bring him back to their school. Back to his friends. Back to his family. He knew that he should, as a hero in training, want to help and save the other boy, but at the same time he wanted to leave the other there with the villains that he had acted like for so many years. Why should he bother? Bakugo had earned the reputation with his behavior. It was his own damn fault for putting himself in that position and then not bothering to try and fix it in any way. Why should he get himself into trouble, bleed and cry and scream, all for someone who had never wanted him to do those things in the first place? He shook his head as he sat up in bed, his abs screaming as his arms were unable to assist at the moment. The questions burned in his head as he tried to figure out why he should do anything to help the blonde that had made his life hell after they had turned 4. Why in the name of All Might should he even bother to help the other? He looked at his lap, thinking about everything, thinking about his life up to this point. Would it have been different if Bakugo had never been in his life? Would he have been happier? Would he have been safer? Would he still be alive? He knew that a lot of the abuse in school would have been a lot worse if Bakugo hadn't been the main antagonist that both brought all and scared away the attention to him. No one had wanted to fight Bakugo to get at the quirkless wannabe, only waiting at the side to have their turn at beating the shit out of him. But that didn't make what the blonde did any better. It still hurt, and he still suffered, and he hurt still now to this day. Especially since he had no clue why his once-upon friend had done what he did. Why did he do it? Who did he think he was? Why did he trust the blonde? Why did he break his trust like he had? Why would the blonde swear that he would? Tears stung in his eyes as he remembered when they were kids, playing in the backyard at the blonde's house. They always played heroes, always rescued the civilian and saved the day. He remembered those days like it had happened just yesterday. Come on, Deku, let's go, we have to help All Might, Kacchan cried out as he ran forward, his blanket flying behind him. I'm coming, he screamed in earnest as he followed the older boy. This scenario was never anything new. It would always end with them winning the day, saving their idol. It was only ever interrupted when Izuku fell or tripped. Come on, Deku, there's no reason to cry, the blonde sighed as he kneeled down next to his friend, wiping at the tears on the other's face. It's only a scrape, you big baby. I know, but I just hate ruining the rescues, he bawled. It was inevitable that they'd be playing, and he would end up hurting himself in some shape or form, just from trying to keep up with the older boy. Hey, it's fine if you fall. The blonde sat down on the ground next to the greenette. Even I, as great as I am, fall down. You just gotta get up again. Don't let things like this scrape stop you from getting up. He smiled at his friend as he grabbed a hold of his hand. And if you can't stand on your own, then I'll help you get up again. Wow, Kacchan, for real? He questioned as he followed the older boy onto their feet, squeezing his hand tightly. It's a promise, Deku. You're useless without me, after all. It was a promise that the blonde had broke again and again and again. Bakugo had lied to him, had betrayed him, had left him to waste away in a pit of anxiety and depression. He hadn't helped Izuku back onto his feet. No, he made sure that the greenette was on the ground as much as possible. So why should he bother helping the blonde when he had given up on helping him? He clenched his eyes shut as tears fell down his cheeks, memories of a warm hand and a bright smile. All Might had picked him up at his lowest point, dragged him from the dark, rocky pit and onto a warm, sunny beach instead. It had been terrifyingly close to how broken he had been before All Might had raced to find him again. If he hadn't, then Izuku wasn't sure where he'd be at the moment. He was glad that he didn't have to find out, but still that didn't help in figuring out what he should do now. He sighed as he fell back into his bed, figuring that he could do this while comfortable. He didn't know if he should help Bakugo out of a desire to help him for him, or because that's what heroes would do. It wouldn't matter in the end because he would do the same thing he's always done when it concerned the blonde. He would help him whether he liked it or not, especially when his life was on the line. Honestly, he should have expected it to end the way it had. Deku had saved him more than once before, after all. That didn't stop Katsuki from grumbling as he laid back in his bed, glaring up at the ceiling as he listened to his mother shout and scream about what had happened to her son. Though he knew it was only because she had to deal with the police, paperwork, and now pros patrolling around their neighborhood more often. Oh well, the consequences of being kidnapped by villains, that was something that would just have to be dealt with, for the time being. Hopefully for not too much longer, as a week had passed already since the Kamino Ward incident. Until then, Katsuki could wallow in his room until school started back up and he could return to his classes, hopefully without any more villain attacks for a few months. He had just decided to take a nap to block out his mother screaming when the doorbell rang. "Katsuki, get your ass down here right now! Your damn teacher's here for a fucking meeting!" His teacher? He sat up and glared at the door for a second before sighing and standing up and slouching out of his room. "I'm coming, you old hag!" He shouted back as he slammed his door out of spite. "You little shit! What the fuck do you think you're doing slamming doors like that?" She glared at her son as he appeared in the living room. He just glared at her before turning to Aizawa, who had his hair up in a half ponytail, clean-shaved, and wearing a white button-up shirt and dress pants. "The fuck are you doing here, Sensei?" he questioned as he leaned against the wall, ignoring the open spot between his parents on the couch. He wasn't about to get in range for his mother to hit him. He didn't think that he could stand having a hand anywhere near his head at the moment. "I'm here because I need to speak with your parents about allowing you to move into the dorms at UA," he announced as he turned to his parents. "I know that we failed to protect him while at the training camp, but the dorms will have more pro-heroes and more security measures." "Take him," Mitsuki said with a glare at the two pro-heroes. "I know that he has an attitude, one that I have attributed greatly, but I've seen his improvement since he started at UA. She held up a hand to Katsuki, stopping him before he could explode. "He was gifted with both brains and a great quirk, but because of that, he's always been praised for shallow things." "Honey, I don't think that they need to know that," Masaru said with a nervous chuckle. "After all, they're dealing with him now, not his past self." "But they need to know," she said just as fiercely. "After Katsuki was grabbed at camp, I realized how horrible I've been. Given I'm not as bad as some abusive parents out there, but I've never been a good mother." She glared at her hands. "Because of that, I missed how off the rails my son had gone, and I haven't prevented further damage to him because of that. I haven't been able to be there for my son, and instead hurt him and my husband." Aizawa frowned as he looked at the blonde woman. "Are you admitting to abusing your son? To a pro-hero that will legally be obligated to report and take your son out of your care?" She met his eyes without any fear, only regret. "I am. But I know that I'll be admitted into an AA facility, and I'm going to get help. While I'm doing that, I ask that you also help my son to continue on the path of a hero and continue to improve his behavior." She bowed deeply on the couch, ignoring the stunned look from her son and the proud look from her husband. "After everything you've said during that conference, I know that you're the one that'll lead my son to be a better person. Please, continue to care for Katsuki and make sure that he becomes a splendid hero." Katsuki could only gulp as he watched as his mother would bow and keep her head down for what seemed like an eternity. "Fucking old hag. I'll make myself a great-ass hero. I don't need no insomniac of a teacher to help," he grumbled, gaining a laugh from his mother and a glare from said teacher. He wondered, though, if his mother could admit that she'd made a mistake and own up to it. Could he do it? Could he own up to what he had done to the other boy that he'd grown up with and become a better person? He wasn't sure, especially after what had happened at Kamino Ward. How could he ever be a better person, when he was the reason why All Might was no longer going to be the greatest hero. Honestly, he knew that he had questions for Bakugo, but he hadn't thought about asking them any time soon. He knew that moving into the dorms, even after the scare his mother had given him about being pulled out, would be hard. He'd have to interact and see Bakugo every day, and there'd be no real escape. He could hide out in his room and his friends' rooms, but other than that, there was always a chance at him being caught up with Bakugo. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to see the blonde everywhere, every day of the week. He wasn't ready to ask his questions, so he tried his hardest to avoid the blonde. That first day in the dorms felt like an eternity, especially when the class decided to go around and look at each other's rooms and decide who'd be king. Spoilers, Sato's cake won for him. Luckily, they decided skipping out on Bakugo's room would be the best course of action since no one wanted to incite his rage, not even the Baku squad. But that still made the day drag on because he was so on edge. He would normally retreat to his own room where he could be left alone and safe, but this wasn't his house. This was the dorms, and there was no guarantee that he'd be left alone, not with all his friends in close proximity at least. He'd have to just wait until it was polite to disappear to his own room. It would only be a little bit longer. It was getting late, and soon everyone would be retreating to their rooms, and he'd finally be left alone to think. Which didn't happen. Problem child. Of course Aizawa would show up just in time to ruin his soon-to-be escape. Come with me, we have something to talk about. Izuku could only let his shoulders hunch up around his ears as he followed the teacher. He and the others had been scolded for going to save Bakugo, so he was sure that wasn't what this was about. He wondered what it could be. He followed the teacher out of the dorms and to the school building and into the principal's office where Nezu and his mother were waiting. "Forgive the late meeting, but I felt now would be better than early in the morning or late after school," Nezu stated as he looked at the teen before turning to his mother. "Now that we're all here, let's begin." Izuku was hugged by his mother before sitting into a chair next to her. Aizawa moved over to stand next to Nezu. Once their attention had returned to the two school personnel, his mother spoke. "What exactly is this meeting about?" "We made a mistake during your son's finals some weeks ago, and we've made moves to rectify our previous behaviors," Nezu began as tea appeared in front of him out of nowhere. He passed out cups and then held his own in his paws as he looked at the woman. "One of the things we offered was therapy for your son, with a verified therapist. We had wanted him in sooner, but many things had occurred rapidly, and so we haven't had the time, especially since we had focused on getting Bakugo into anger management classes." Inko blinked for a long moment, before a small smile appeared on her face and her hands were laced in her lap. Izuku gulped as he leaned away from his mother and curled up in the chair as much as he could. He knew what that smile meant, and it meant nothing good. "Are you telling me that my son was placed in a dangerous situation that you knew could end badly and you didn't bother to call me about it?" Izuku watched from his curled position as Aizawa and Nezu had glanced at each other before Aizawa spoke. "It was, unfortunately, thought of after everything that had occurred. As his homeroom teacher, I apologize for the negligence in my care for your son and keeping you informed of any worries that I have had." He bowed to her deeply, his nose almost touching his knees. Inko kept her gaze steady and calm as she looked at the two. "Should I be considering pulling him from this school and transferring him to a different one?" The boy made sure not to have eye contact with anyone in the room. He had known that he had asked for a transfer before, but so far the principal had kept his word and was trying to further keep it. He wondered how the two were going to get out of this. "I will not lie, your son has asked for a transfer after the incident at the finals," Nezu admitted, startling everyone in the room. "I managed to talk him out of it, and I wish for you to give us a chance to make up for our negligence, just as I asked of your son." He took a sip of his tea before meeting the mother's eyes. "Part of our deal was that Bakugo would be admitted to anger management courses, Midoriya was to change seats in class, and that he no longer be paired with Bakugo in any way. In return, Midori would also attend therapy sessions to try and combat the abuse that he suffered through." Aizawa finished with crossed arms and a slouch, though his eyes burned in anger. Inko paused before turning to her son. "What abuse? Katsuki and Izuku have been friends since they were children, though I was aware there was a disagreement at some point, and they became distant. I was unaware of any abuse." Izuku buried himself further into the chair, as he tried to curl himself into non-existence. He'd never told his mother what was happening at school. He'd never allowed her to see the burns, the bruises, the cuts and scars that he attained over the years. She was friends with Mitsuki, and so he hadn't wanted to ruin that. So the look his mother was sending him at the moment understandably sent chills of terror down his spine. "What abuse, Izuku?" she questioned as her eyes had narrowed. He gulped as He peeked over at his mother with a weak smile. I... He trailed off as he lost any ability to speak, and he curled further into himself. Inko gave him one more look filled with sympathy before turning back to the teachers. From what I understand, from all you've said, Katsuki's abused and injured my son repeatedly this year, and yet you're now just taking steps to rectify the treatment? She questioned stonily. I hadn't realized it was abuse that he was undergoing at the time, Aizawa admitted with a shrug. I had thought that it was just Bakugo's inability to work effectively with others. But you saw what he did to my son, she questioned, and when she got a nod in return, she did continue. So why did you not separate the boys when you realized the treatment? Did he treat other students similarly, or was it just my son? It was only Midoriya, he admitted, looking away from the angry mother. Yet you assumed that it was toward everyone in class. I don't know about you, but that in itself is negligence. My son suffered under Katsuki, and you continue to place him in danger. Why did you push instead of sitting down and talking with them, calling parents when it was obvious that there was a danger to my son? Her voice didn't raise at all, but the tone suggested that she dearly wanted to. There was a fierceness in this woman that neither expected at all. We are trained to spot signs of abuse, yes, but that does not make us infallible. We have made a grievous error in judgment, and so we are trying to make up for it. All we ask is that we are given a chance, Nezu stated as he pushed papers to the mother. Allow us to get Midoriya in to see a therapist, one that you can choose from and we will pay for. Then we shall go from there and see what we can do to better improve the situation and both constitutions of the boys. Inko kept her stare for a long moment, silent as she judged the two teaching staff. She opened her mouth, ready to pull her son out of the school this instant, despite him just moving into the dorms, only to pause as a weak tug on her skirt had caught her attention. Izuku had uncurled himself from his position and made sure his mother was watching before his hands had moved rapidly. Let them try. Her shoulder slumped as she sighed before pulling the papers toward her. All right. Izuku and I will go over all of this, here and get back to you. She paused and gave both a firm look that spoke of bodily harm if they didn't do as she said next. But I expect you to inform me of any more harm coming to my boy due to abuse or negligence. If not, I will not hesitate to pull him right out and enroll him elsewhere. We understand, and we promise to do our best to keep Izuku safe while in our care. Nezu and Aizawa had bowed deeply, as the two greenettes began to go over the list of therapists. He was exhausted. By the time he got back to the dorms, the lights were turned off and all was quiet, and he was hoping to go straight back to bed, only to be stopped when a mop of blonde hair appeared in front of him. Follow me, Bakugo said as he walked out of the dorms. Izuku considered ignoring him for the longest time, not following him and going to bed instead, except there were things he wanted to know, things that he wouldn't unless he asked them. He gulped as he thought about them before sighing and turning to walk out the doors and following the boy to Field Beta. What is it you want? Izuku questioned as he looked at the blonde. This was a horrible idea. He should have stayed at the dorms and gone straight to bed. Why did he do this again? Oh yeah, he had questions. He watched as Bakugo walked until he came to a stop in the middle of one of the streets. Izuku quickly was backing away and out of reach so that he could dodge if it came to it. The greenette watched the blonde's back, waiting to see what the other planned to do. It seemed like an eternity before the blonde had finally looked over his shoulder at the other. That power of yours. You got it from All Might, right? He questioned, narrowing his crimson eyes. His head snapped back as if he was slapped. When he had followed Bakugo out here, that wasn't what he expected from the other. Since you aren't denying it, I'm assuming I'm right. Fuck. The blonde growled out as he turned to fully face the other. We both wanted to be like him growing up. What's it got to do with anything? He signed, as he watched the other warily. He wasn't sure if the other was paying attention to his hands, but he had to try. The weak little fucking pebble I was going to use to step up and become the best, Bakugo continued. Got the goddamn recognition from him without me even realizing it. He held a hand out to the other, palm facing up as his shoulders had tensed. Because of that, let's fight, here and now. What? Izuku could only stare at the blonde in horror as he stretched out his arms. If you don't want to get hurt, then fight me seriously. The blonde slammed forward, right arm reaching for the greenette. Izuku didn't waste a second as he dodged out of the way, avoiding the blow that would have slammed into his leg if he hadn't moved. He tried to open his mouth and shout at the other, but his voice hadn't returned after the meeting with his mother. He couldn't talk. He couldn't yell. All he could do was dodge, as Bakugo slammed forward toward him with explosion after explosion. Fight me! The blonde shouted as Izuku finally flipped onto his hands and slammed a foot into the other's chest, pushing him backward away from him so that he couldn't land a hit on him. Why are you running from me? Why are you not fighting me? Izuku couldn't respond, as he had bounced backwards again. He really should have stayed in the dorms and gone to his room. This was obviously something about the blonde's pride again. Was this really why he'd come out here? To scream at him about the fact that he'd gained All Might's power and not himself? Why was it no matter what he did, he was always behind Deku now? Why was he always lagging behind and unable to do anything to push forward and get stronger and stronger than all of them? But Deku had gotten stronger before he'd realized. When they were kids, Deku had always ran behind him, and the others. He'd always been weaker and slower and unable to keep up, always offering to help him when he fell, like he pitied him or something. It made his blood boil. Why? He screamed as he shot forward once more, slamming a hand against the other's face and letting off an explosion. It wouldn't be enough to scar, but it would singe and burn for a good day or so before it faded. Why was it you that was chosen? He screamed when Deku managed to kick his feet up and knock off one of his explosions, causing him to fall to the ground. He screamed once more as he stood up, ignoring the look Deku sent him, unsure what to do. Well, it was my fault that All Might ended up losing everything. He remembered the bony figure, pointing his finger at the camera and the dust flying around the emaciated form. It was a nightmare that he had wished he'd never been a part of. It was something he didn't want to admit or deal with. Why was I the one that ended All Might? He couldn't believe it. This bastard. This was why he brought Izuku out here. To scream that it was his fault that All Might had fallen and that Izuku hadn't been able to get one for all and become stronger. That pissed him off. Fuck you! He screamed as he glared at the other teen, who was staring at him startled. You think what happened to All Might was your fault? How self-absorbed can you get? He was there to rescue me, you dipshit. The blonde's hands popped and crackled, while his eyes glared determinedly at the greenette. If I was stronger, faster, a better hero, that would have never happened. Yes, it would have! Izuku screamed right back at him as he stomped forward. You know he'd given me his power, a power that I'm trying to make my own. Because of that, he was losing his strength already. It would have ended up the same way, no matter what the circumstances. But why did it have to be me? Luck of the fucking draw! Izuku flipped onto his hands and slammed a foot into the other's face, sending him flying. If this is all you dragged me out here for, then I'm going back to the dorms. Fuck no, it ain't. Bakugo was already up and flying back at the other, and before Izuku could counter, a blast sent him flying backwards. I'm gonna fight you to prove that I'm still the best. That shitty nerd Pebble won't stop me from climbing the fucking ladder. Izuku ducked down and slid underneath the other, moving to run, but was instead slammed face down into the concrete. He growled as he pushed power into his arms and legs and instead sent himself flying into the air. He knew that if he wasn't careful he would use more power than 5%, but that didn't matter at the moment. So, with that in mind, when he slammed into the ground, he shot forward, much faster than before. Katsuki's eyes widened as he crossed his arms to block, taking the blow from those red sneakers head-on before being sent flying backwards. I'm done being your punching bag! Izuku screamed as he continued to shoot forward. Bring it on, you shitty nerd! Katsuki moved to slam a blast into the other's face, but Izuku ducked the blow and sent a kick up to the other. The blonde dodged, though, and instead grabbed the other's ankle and threw him in the air. He followed a second later to take a shot at the other. He'll think I'll send a kick at him, Izuku thought as he positioned himself to make it look like he was going to kick. He knows I've changed to kicks to avoid strain on my arms. He won't expect me to use them at 5%. With that he moved and instead slammed his fist into the surprised blonde's face, only to howl in anger as Katsuki flipped it, grabbing his wrist and spinning them around so Izuku took the brunt force trauma of it when they slammed into the ground, due to an explosion that Katsuki had sent off. He could only lay there as Katsuki kept a hand on his face. One hand held his arm, and his foot kept pressure on his opposite wrist. I win. Izuku hated that the blonde was right. I'd give you both house arrest, but I don't trust either of you in the same building, Aizawa growled as he glared at the two students. With that in mind, Midori will be working with Nezu, and Bakugo will be here for his house arrest. He growled at the two. You'll also not be allowed to stay in the dorms alone, and Bakugo, count this as strike 1. 2 more chances and you'll be expelled. The two didn't look at the teacher, and neither looked at each other. Aizawa sighed before waving them off. Get off to bed. Midori, report to Nezu in the morning. Bakugo, you still have anger management classes, so make sure that you're ready for those. He watched them walk off with limps and grumbles, Toshinori following them to keep them from further arguing. He wondered how he was going to help either student when all they seemed to do was fight when anywhere near each other. Though he was rather proud that Midori had fought back instead of taking the abuse, hopefully this was a step further for the green-haired teen to healing, and hopefully they'll be able to help Bakugo heal himself from his own trauma and anger issues. Either way, it would take time to tell for sure. All right, everyone. This concludes the fourth fic in the Breaking Point series, entitled Breaking Ground. Fic 5 in the series will be next. I hope you guys are still enjoying this, and let me know your thoughts and reactions. But as always, thank you so much for listening.